Welcome to Pop and Lock. I'm Natalie Dowzicki.
And I'm Landry Ayers.
In our eyes, the best way to celebrate both Halloween and the upcoming election is to discuss the horror slasher film, The Purge: Election Year. The dystopian film is set in the not-so-distant future where the new founding fathers of America are their dominant political party. But a young newcomer, Senator Charlie Roan, is trying to unseat the incumbent to put a stop to government-sanctioned violence. Joining in our purge of The Purge today is culture writer at Vox, Asia Romano.
Hi.
And writer and producer Meredith Clark.
Hi.
This movie is different from a lot of others that we talk about on this show, mainly because this one, to me at least, is not good. But there's a lot to talk about. It grossed over $118 million in its opening weekend worldwide, which is a lot considering it was only made on $10 million. What is it about The Purge that has consistently drawn enough of an audience and profit to merit 4 films and 2 seasons of a TV show?
I mean, don't we all want catharsis in some way? It's
Sure.
And it's like most base level. I think there's some element of that. Also, it's so stupid, but they try so hard to do world building, and I find myself compelled to watch it just because of that.
It's also, it's got the baseline appeal of nihilism, like glitzy nihilism, dressed up as with a smattering of social commentary. Like it's very, it's a lot like Fight Club in the sense that it works very hard to condemn the thing that it's glamorizing. But everybody is in on the game. Like everybody knows that you're here to watch people get killed and things up. And I think election year, it's so surreal to do this with like clown music in the background because I feel like I'm in the purge. Like I don't know if you guys can hear, but for the listeners at home, there's an ice cream truck in the background right now, and this conjunction, this paradoxical conjunction of like whimsy and gleeful mayhem outside, like carnival mayhem outside, while I'm trying to discuss the very serious topic at hand, is sort of an encapsulation of the purge itself, because you have these very carnival-esque people who are all wearing masks, and they have any number of weapons that they'll use, and they're usually totally in disguise, and so you have this idea of like these marauders just roaming the streets throughout each of the Purge films, right? And the Purge election year especially leans into that. There are the way it's directed is very fever dream-like in terms of its street sequences and the way that the marauders are portrayed. And it seems to be leaning in with more self-awareness than ever to its own nihilism, right? And its own gleeful embrace of violence. And I'm always a little torn because you know that it's obviously capitalizing on the representation of violence and mayhem in a way that appeals to audiences. Like there are all these scenes in the Purge election year of like sort of creative torture,
Mm-hmm.
and those scenes are definitely meant to compel audiences. And when I think I saw the film opening weekend with a really rowdy audience who was totally into it. And it's just one of those things that I think audiences who go to see films like this know what they're doing. But at the same time, I think most people really keep coming back to The Purge because it is also doing, like Meredith said, that slightly more complicated world building, and it's trying to layer compelling social commentary on top of that, and it sort of builds out more as it goes along. I think as it becomes more self-conscious and maybe ashamed of itself,
right,
as a franchise. But you still also have you have all this world building and have all this social commentary happening alongside like these very gauzy dream sequences almost of very sexualized women with like baseball bats and stuff, like just here to things up, right? So you have that sort of paradoxical thing happening with Purge, and which is again part of the commentary of the series itself.
It's interesting that you mentioned the social commentary aspect of specifically the election year installment of the Purge movies, because I think out of all the Purge movies, this probably has the most social commentary in it. I mean, the tagline of the movie was literally "Keep America Great," and it did come out in 2016.
Right.
So I think their intention of this movie, also calling it election year in an election year, was
Right.
very they were targeting their message about this movie very specifically.
Well, they also had the main female protagonist also is meant to be kind of a Hillary Rodham Clinton Elizabeth Warren sort of composite.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, like we are definitely meant to recognize her as someone we know.
Right. And I also just think it gave them more opportunities. This movie specifically gave them more opportunities to world build, like Meredith had said, but it just fell flat in a lot of instances. Like you could see it almost there, and you could see like them certainly poking at many political themes. But I think that was part of, and going back to what Lendra, part of the reason the movie wasn't a good movie, like at the face of it, because they would world built just enough for the movie to like make sense, but not enough to like satisfy the audience, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense to me, like the way it pans out, because they sprinkle in, like you said, world building, world building, world building. It is an amazing conceit for a film that this whole thing has been built on. 12 hours where all crime is legal. And they do a pretty good job of talking about motivations for it, social impacts, and the fallout. But they never dig deep into any of those the leads that spring off of it. It's all like a line here, a line there, which could be taken as subtlety, but then by the end, the way the plots of the film sort of develop, it becomes hypocritical almost. Like James DeMonaco talks about how he wanted these movies, and I think specifically Election Year, to be a lot about gun violence. But by the end, you have audiences, and I read this a lot in reception about the movie, is audiences cheering on everyone killing people.
Right.
Specifically,
Right.
one that comes to mind is when Pequeña Muerte is driving the triage ambulance and runs over the purgers that are outside the convenience store, sort of defending them. And then in a single shot gets out of the car and, grabbing a shotgun, just shoots this girl in the face with like so much gore and so directly. Like, it could have been done in a way that probably showed more conflict in her as someone who, you know, had been a part of the Purge and then chose to sort of be involved in more, peaceful direct action. But instead, she shoots this girl in the face, doesn't give her a chance to sort of redeem herself or run away or live and learn her lesson. She violently executes her and then says little death is back as this mark of pride. And I was kind of like, but I thought the whole point was that to me, it really does scream hypocrisy. It just falls back on everything that it's trying to criticize.
I keep finding it so frustrating anytime I see, because I've seen them all. Anytime I watch these movies that, look, I'm a completist. What can I say?
Oh, I get it. Because
Dedicated
the
fan base.
universe that it's set in is fascinating. I get why.
Every time I find myself so much more interested in the throwaway lines or these bits and pieces of these elements. Every single character who isn't the main character is a person I want to see their story, why they're purging, why they have these fears. I'm curious about how purge insurance works. Like, all of the actual nerdy details of this universe end up being more compelling to me than, especially in Election Year, what turns out to be a pretty lame white savior narrative.
It because you have this whole movie that is building up, talking about how the people who are actually being sort of hunted in the Purge and are the reason that it was created was to exterminate mainly poor people of color in the United States by this cabal of Christian fundamentalist Republicans. And it takes very good steps to show how they, dealing with the means that they have through direct action and without state support, actually are able to at least take care of themselves or support one another in the face of this state sanctioned violence, even if it's not always perpetrated by the state. What, spoiler alert, it absolutely is, we find out.
Well, one thing that's powerful about that is that what you just said about the communities surviving in the face of state sanctioned violence, like that is relatable to people in terms of
Sure.
extrapolating a metaphor that obviously has ramifications for the way that marginalized communities get exploited by the government, right? And social systems. And so I think you have two different sort of, I guess, impulses driving the audience reaction, I think, and the audience response, because you have, on the one hand, you have I think that recognition that these are the people that we're supposed to root for, right? Like you're supposed to root for the marginalized underdogs. But then you also have the fact that this is an action movie / horror movie. And audiences of those films come to see their heroes fuck shit up. Like they come to the, specifically to the theater on opening weekend to have that shared communal, everybody cheering and clapping in the audience for the heroes. Like that's something that the movie has to deliver on in order to be an effective example of the trope, right? So how can you do that if you're also critiquing everything the trope is doing? Like that's something that not just this franchise has wrestled with, but many other action movies and horror movies have wrestled with, right? And I think the fact that I may be making this sound like I admire the franchise more than I do, but but I do think that like it's tried. This is the problem you always get, whether you're talking about any type of media from Elizabethan like morality plays on, like as you stage this and as you represent the thing is representation endorsement, right? And especially in something that's semi-satirical like The Purge is, like especially election year specifically, which I think is the most satirical of the Purge franchises or franchise movies. You get this very, very, very thin line between satirizing itself and this moment where it could further indict the audience for enjoying it.
Right.
But it doesn't ever quite get there. I think it's trying to, like it wants, there are films that I watch that are similar to this where, actually I was thinking about the church annihilation scene where at the end, like they basically have this like giant massacre happen in a church because, as part of its commentary on like the rise of the NRA and like the, basically the way that the NRA essentially evolved into the founding fathers, which is what the Purge franchise basically predicates itself on, right? And you have this conflation of the NRA with like religious Christianity and right-wing Christianity and fundamentalism that basically winds up in a church where they're about to very religiously kill the senator, the feminist senator who wants to ruin everything, in this religious rite, basically. And it's very, very ritualistic. There's a lot of very obvious implied commentary there, right? But then you have this like almost like Wild West shoot 'em up scene that happens, like this like over the top thing where like the heroes are in the like a vestibule up top or something and in the top of the church, and they all get shot at by like this horde of faceless FBI people or security, I don't know, people with guns, and and it's so over the top. It's staged so awkwardly. It's just like it really feels like an OK Corral kind of shootout, like something like something you would see in a Western. And it's this tonal shift from here's this moment where you have this this really kind of like sinister religious ritual being executed around the idea of these people who've essentially like embedded the ideals of worship of the Second Amendment. Basically, like that's what you have, like this idea that the Second Amendment has become a religious principle. And you sort of see that embodied on screen in a way that could be effective if it weren't immediately undermined by this. And I was thinking about what other types of films I think have done similar things more effectively. And I kept thinking about the 2014 film Kingsman, which has which has a very similar, like totally like frenzied church massacre.
Oh, that's a great bloodbath.
It's so great, and it's such it's almost cathartic in the way. Like I remember when I was watching it in the theater, I was the movie keeps you sort of uncomfortable with its own love of guns, but at some point it just basically asks you to accept that you're this kind of and embrace it. And like it basically just asks you, like it's a movie that you can feel asking you to just give up and accept that you want to see the heroes massacre a bunch of people in a church. and then it does it, and it does it with such gleeful mayhem that I felt like the indictment was there, and I felt like the indictment was inherently a part of the film. And I know that that's not something everyone has had. That's not a reaction everyone has had, because I've read and talked to plenty of people who thought that film was just, lowbrow garbage, right?
Right.
Because it's so violent, because there's what's there to what's redeeming there. And I think you always have this question, as long as you're going to have action films, as long as you're going to have this on-screen glorification of gun violence, right? You're going to have this conversation. Like, is there ever a way to do gun violence on screen in a blockbuster that doesn't feel like it's either cheapening the commentary or basically just exploiting the audience's like desire to see things blown up and desire to see blood and gore and guts on screen?
Right. I think this horror movie obviously falls into like the glorification of violence, most definitely, like probably all horror films. But I also think it kind of uses a few different like classic horror tropes. So like the idea of blood sacrifice, like in order for a society to be healthy, you just have to like kill people sometimes, or you have to like get rid of the low rung. So like immediately when I thought of other films, I was thinking The Hunger Games, which isn't necessarily a horror film, but it has
Royale is.
Right. Battle Royale is like the trope starter, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then I also was thinking of like the famous short story, The Lottery. So it's like this idea that you're like, you have people you serve up as like sacrifice. So The Purge obviously plays on this quite a bit.
And it's also like that idea of sort of the village sacrifice. Like you go, I think that's sort of it's almost like a folkloric narrative too. Like thinking about stuff like the Wicker Man, like you have the lone girl who's basically like, she's sort of the bait for this policeman that the village has essentially chosen to be its annual sacrifice, right? Like you have that type of, I guess, ritualistic killing going back to very, very far in culture. And you see it, I think, increasingly in films that are trying to sort of put forth this really conservative narrative of like the ends justify the means. And I think we've been seeing a lot more of those films really pop up in the action genre over the last, I'd say, 2 decades, right? Where you get this sense of the narrative's ultimate conclusion seems to be that it can indict every other person in the film for violence except the hero, who gets to be the sole exception, right? Like their violence is always justified. Their violence is always the thing that is good violence, right? And you don't really ever get a full critique of what you do, but very, very rarely, I think, do you get a film that really commits to fully critiquing the violence and critiquing the sort of moral toll, the sort of mental toll that it takes on all the characters, no matter who's involved and no matter why, especially like in the action genre particularly. And I couldn't really think of any. I thought maybe Logan, the X-Men film Logan, sort of
Sure.
got close to that, but still, it's still an X-Men film, right? So I don't know. Like, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I couldn't think of any other examples off the top of my head.
Not in the sort of blockbuster space. I think the something that really ends up being a problem with the Purge election year is that it just felt like there was no weight to this idea. People speak about there being a toll to the violence, and yet it's really, nobody actually believes it. They just kind of go along.
Right.
And that somehow you say, oh, no, that's fine. And also it's ridiculous that a movie this silly attempts more to critique state-sanctioned violence than like our prestige. The government has to do some really messed up shit to get justice against the bad people.
Right.
It's like, why, we gave a bunch of Oscars to Zero Dark 30, but The Purge is really morally reprehensible. Sorry, guys. Like, let's step back.
Yeah.
But that also speaks to me of why this isn't appealing. Again, to Asia's earlier point, it's appealing to people because there is the distrust in the systems that exist, that they're not here to protect us, that they are actually here to do violence. And why not make it explicit? And maybe we are getting closer to a time when people will be able to make movies that actually look at the corrosive effects. But, they tried it with James Bond and it didn't work.
You bring up a really interesting point, which is the sort of the repercussions of the Purge within the world and the lack of effect that seems to be exhibited outside of the Purge for things that happen during the Purge, and also the distinction between government-sanctioned and enacted violence and private action. It seems odd to me in this movie and in the universe that it seems like because the government sanctioned this the new founding fathers are strong enough to rewrite enough of our regulation to establish a night where for 12 hours everything is illegal, but still allow for a second party and an election. Now, whether that is sort of being, is sort of fraudulent and, they have puppet candidates that might have started that way. But it seems like from the Purge election year that there are real candidates that are gaining support and people want this. And there is enough of a population that they can end the Purge and win the Electoral College with over 270 votes, all thanks to Florida. It's just weird to me. Do private actors not have any incentive to try and stop the Purge? Like insurance companies, sure, they benefit from the Purge because people need Purge insurance and they, charge super high premiums, and that, you can think about that what you will, but no other private entities are launching campaigns to be like, hey, maybe we shouldn't purge. This is bad for business. Like in that world, would Amazon be like, you know what? Purging's actually pretty good for us. We can sell a lot of guns and bullets and ship those. Or would there be enough that Amazon or some other company would be like, maybe we shouldn't do this?
Well, Amazon would be against it because they'd be too worried about their warehouses and they wouldn't want to lose their product.
I mean, I think that this is a really interesting question, because if you asked it before 2020, my answer probably would have been different. But it's like the Jurassic Park thing. Like you watch Jurassic Park and you're like, well, why the hell are they keeping the parks open? And why the hell are we still in October of 2020 still trying to convince people that if they go outside they will die? Like, why is that a thing that keeps having to happen? Like, why do we keep having, why is there such a social resistance to actually taking fundamental change to fix the pandemic, to basically like alleviate pain and harm being caused during the pandemic, right? Like instead you have colleges reopening, you have schools reopening, you have everything reopening, and people are just basically being told that they have to return to work and deal with it, right? Like this is the reality that we're in. Like, there's like at no point has there been any sort of like major corporation or figurehead of capitalism, I would say, that has stepped forward to be like, my profits are not as important as the lives of the people in my employ. So everyone will be staying home indefinitely with pay so that they'll have what they need so that they can all return when they're healthy. Like, that's not a thing that is happening, right? So having seen this play out over the last however many months, I don't really feel like I am as worried about the I guess the logistics of why people aren't protesting the purge as much, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, I mean, and we've seen this over the last 4 years, like the systematic destruction of democracy in this country, right? At every single step of the way, you've had protesters in the streets, but you've not really had like any type of sustained, organized resistance from I guess, people in power, in terms of people who control sources of wealth and production in the country,
like special interest groups haven't come in the fold.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, just jumping off what Asia said, I could see different companies having different responses. What feels weird about the movie is that there isn't that private element to it. You know, it's that some places would be for it, some places would be against it, but we're not that far into the future in this alternate universe. Giant corporations would be working hand in hand with the new founding fathers to contract to do things. Like, they would also have opinions, just as large special interest groups have now. And it's so odd that feels like a missed opportunity, because there's one moment in the Purge anarchy where people are walking through downtown Los Angeles and they pass a bank and there's a man strung up with a note tied to him and it says, "Here lies blah, blah, blah. He stole our pensions." And that's as close as they get to, okay, the banks are definitely into something.
I also wonder, I wonder if there's, I mean, thinking about those side stories, the fact that all crime is legal, right? Like, it seems like there would be so many opportunities if the Purge was really committed to, and I haven't seen the series, so it's possible that the series is delving into this more on the like micro level that I think we're talking about. But it seems like there would be so many opportunities for a type of restorative justice and a type of look at ways the night of purging could be used to rectify imbalances. Like, even if it's stuff like I don't know, sabotaging pipelines in Native American spaces, right? Like,
a friend of mine asked me, and I said, well, I'd break into a drug warehouse and I'd steal a bunch of insulin to give to people.
Yeah,
like
something like that.
You know,
right.
I was watching a YouTube video where someone was saying that the way that to end the purge, to stop the purge and stop the violence, is for enough people to get together and file fraudulent tax returns during the period, because it falls during the tax filing season, and you can file your tax returns and claim a huge amount, and then you'll just drain the new founding fathers' government, and you have to start over again. Because the whole point of it is to save money. And I was like, that's actually really brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, also, it's ridiculous that we don't see any financial crimes. And I don't know if that's just because of course it's not sexy. But everybody knows that the purge would be a huge bonanza for people who wanted to commit like wire fraud.
You know, if they were really going to do this, they should set a purge, like set one of the movies at an abortion clinic. Like, they should go, like, try and.
Oh, that would be so dark.
Right. Like, but if they're really gonna drill down into like the effects of violence on the on marginalized communities and the way that I mean, obviously that would never get greenlit in a million years. but that idea of like just taking the effects of violence to the extreme, most individualistic point that you can find in this world. And I think about like, oh, well, an abortion clinic, obviously, where people like individuals would be directly impacted by the sort of the social and systemic hands at work to bring them to this point of violence, right? And I think that's something that the Purge keeps trying to do. I think the Purge, the first Purge, which is the sequel to Election Year, is a prequel. Sorry, it's the film that came after Election Year. It's the prequel to the entire franchise, and it's set on Staten Island, right?
Yeah,
Staten Island, and it's basically. It really kind of centers the entire story on one character who's trying to get through the very first Purge. And you sort of really see how he embodies the marginalized community that the Purge has been hinting the entire time that is most affected. Basically, like poor, mainly Black men who may have strong communities, but they're directly targeted by racism and by white supremacy and by systemic violence being inflicted against them. And I think that this is the moment where the Purge could have really, really dug into all of the political ramifications that it was trying to manifest over the three previous films. And I don't think it really got there. I think there was like one moment where you find out that some of the mobilized militia that had been hired to enact the Purge, the first Purge, you find out that some of them have white supremacist ties, and so forth. And you get that throughout the series. Like, I think there are a couple of Nazi symbols being bandied about at various points. But you don't really, it's just sort of like window dressing, you know? And considering where we are at in the culture, like right now, like I don't know that that's responsible. Like I don't know that you can really just sort of hand wave that.
I also think it's interesting that throughout this discussion, and we're talking about like, okay, everything's legal for an evening, but they never really discuss, or it's never really brought up like the idea of this, like the morality of law. Like even if something is legal during a time period, or if there's a law, why isn't there any like this discussion of like, okay, why, like if this is legal, like, oh yeah, let's all go and do it because it's legal now. I think more people would be like, at least I would hope that your morality steps in. You're like, okay, like maybe I shouldn't do this.
Yeah, well, don't they say that, like, isn't there a throwaway line that Roan says in the election year where she says, like, I don't know if she's, hyperbolizing, but she says, I'm going to stay home and, lock my doors like 99% of the population.
Oh, I just thought that was a Bernie line. Like,
I wasn't sure. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I get that. And that would be a good sort of reference. But I wonder and because true confessions, I have not seen any of the other Purge movies, though I'm fascinated by the world that they have built. I have read a lot about them online, and this is the first time I have watched one.
Well, I think this, like, again, it gets into the satire question, because, like, the point of the Purge's satire is to characterize the excesses of Americans and to sort of imply that every American has this excess within them, right? Like, and you haven't seen the very first movie, but the first movie ends with like the wife of Ethan Hawke, who was played by Lena Headey, sort of like she's got all of her neighbors corralled in her house after this night of like terror, and basically she's sort of keeping them hostage for a little bit. It's a long story, but she one of them, she has a gun that she's been using to keep them at bay with, and one of them reaches for the gun when her head is turned, and she like body slams this woman on the table and like gives her an instant massive nose, like basically breaks her nose, and she screams, "I told you, no more violence!" Like it's just so obviously over the top and so obviously meant to be like an indictment, right, of this idea that every single human, when pressed to the breaking point, is going to turn violent. Like,
well, and I mean, in the second one, in the Purge Anarchy, which is my personal favorite, the guy like Matt Landry from Friday Night Lights is in it. It's
great
wonderful.
Name, phenomenal name.
But Matt Saracen, sorry, not Matt Landry. But they just lay it out, and that it does seem like almost everyone, the sort of quote unquote normals, it does seem like the morality of the Purge is, everyone agrees that it's wrong, and then it's just the rich people. They have all of these lines throughout the movie where, you know, at one point the grandfather of the two female, like this mother and daughter pair that is the main characters of the movie, he writes them a letter and he gets into a limo and the letter says, oh, you know, I'm making myself a martyr to a wealthy family. So they like say explicitly, the rich people decide to purge by hiring people that they can just kill in their homes where they're safe. And there's an auction for people, like wealthy people who all have these garishly lit, very reminiscent of the Black Hole Sun video by Soundgarden in some ways. And they're, you know, desperate. They're bidding on the chance to join in this last hunt of the purge. And it seems to make it the point that the people who are most invested in this are the people for whom the laws were invented in the first place. That the purge is so that rich people can get their yayas out because they can't like have drop down fights at the country club like they did in Dynasty. And it's sort of a weird, it doesn't make any sense, and they kind of carry it over to the Purge mask, but that would be something I would be much more interested in seeing. Like, what are the social consequences within the groups of people that actually decide to purge? Because it's just assumed that it happens.
Right. It's also assumed that there are no long-lasting repercussions. Like, oh, well, it was the purge, you can't help it. But like in reality, obviously there would be, you know, if you really hated your neighbor, so you killed your neighbor, that might have ramifications for the way the rest of your block treats you the rest of the year, right? Like, we don't really see any of that. Like, it's the idea that there's just and like this might be kind of an implied part of the commentary, because as we know from American history, we have a society-wide ability to draw a tidy blank over our own memories of institutional trauma, right? And it seems like at the micro level, the purge is implying that happens every year, you know?
Yeah, because it's like there's this social acceptance of the purge that's like, well, it's kind of like, you know, what happens in Vegas. It's like what happens on purge night. Everyone just kind of is like waves their hand at it. Whereas, you know, I wonder, like in a job interview, or like, you know, if you apply to a job and then you post a bunch of pictures on Facebook or on Twitter of you like can't wait for purge, or like just purged last night, because, you know, it's legal and you don't have to worry about it, would employers not be like, well, we don't want a purger in our office? Or would the new founding fathers codify that into something that you can't discriminate based on?
Well, that's actually a part of the television show. I think I remember from one of the episodes where there's some young couple and they're struggling to make it, and they, you know, to be accepted to get this job, like you have to purge to be accepted into this, you know, exclusive.
Oh, so they flip it. It's that you have to purge to get the job.
You're not the right kind of person unless you're willing to do this. And it's
great idea. Have no idea if the show's
so
great.
ridiculous. I mean, this movie is not good, right? And the fact that there's been 4 of them and there's like more in the works, it's just like mind blowing to me. But another thing I was thinking of, like, if we're getting into like the nerdier aspects of the movie, like why didn't they build out like how do you get a job after you purge? Like Landry said, they like very briefly mention this idea of murder tourism and the fact that people would travel from other countries to come in just to kill Americans. And I think
do you think they sell packages for that? They sell, like, you know, you bundle your flight and your hotel,
I'm sure they have,
and we
like,
throw
entire,
in a gun.
like, safari retreat.
Oh, 100%.
Yes.
And they probably have like purge
gosh.
hotels. Like, I'm sure that they probably have like you know, like haunted house attractions, except that like you get like, I don't know, you pay $5,000 or $10,000, I don't know, however many thousands of dollars to be in the, like, to have like a most dangerous game night or something, you know?
Right.
Yeah, or you stay at the hotel. It's like stay at your own risk because everyone is going to be hunting everyone else in this hotel. Give me my money, James DeMonaco.
This is made me think of
Give me my money.
Like doing a version of the purge where they just do, where it's Sleep No More, but like it's Sleep No More on purge night, you know? Like, so you're just
my God.
We gotta write this. We gotta write this down, guys.
Yeah.
going back to what you guys said about the kind of like business side of this, I keep thinking about how the Purge as a theme has at its core the sort of basic marketing need to make Americans fear and be afraid so that they'll buy stuff, so that they'll consume stuff to help their keep them comfortable, keep them safe. And to some extent, like, you obviously like need to have the most expensive security system, whatever, right? In order to survive Purge night. And so like the very first Purge movie really emphasizes that Ethan Hawke is living in this like probably gated community in this very, very secure house, right? That is still not secure enough to keep the Purgers from getting inside, right? But I keep thinking about like how expensive that entire like home security must have been, and thinking like, so what do people do if they're living in apartments? Like, how does that look for like, how does like the average New Yorker protect themselves from the Purge if they're wealthy and they can afford it, but they're living in an apartment, right, or a condo? And I also wonder how that system sustains itself, because once you've outfitted everybody, once you've given everybody the security system, what else can you sell them? Like what are the other accoutrements of capitalism that coalesce around purges, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I just think like there are so many good stories you could tell as like offshoots of this story. Like I good, and by good I mean like absolutely terrible. Like they turned out to be absolutely terrible films. But I just think like this whole, like, there are so many like one-liners they throw in, and whether it's like murder tourism or like purge insurance, and like I'm sure the show goes into more detail. I'm gonna admit too, I've never seen the show, and you know, after this conversation I probably still won't go and see the show, but I just like there's so much that's ripe for so much opportunity here to really expand on the universe, because apparently there's a big enough audience to do so. But I think another thing that came up while you guys were talking is this idea that like, so obviously the rich and like we were saying, the big businesses are capitalizing on this purge night, whether they're selling security or they're selling guns or what have you. And it's like they're and then the rich participate because it's like a way to like, for lack of better terms, like get out their need to be violent. And that was like very similar to the conversation we had about Westworld, was this idea that like, because the rich are ready and willing to pay money to go into this alternate world where they can be like not judged, and they can go like live in the Wild West and like shoot people if they want, or like cheat on their wives with like robot-esque almost, well, I mean, Westworld's a whole nother story, but it's the same idea as like the rich have like these access points where they have to like, where they can like express all their sins and they can go and do as they please. And it just got me thinking of like that same conversation that came up, and it's another conversation for it that's eminent in Jurassic World as well. But I just thought it was interesting that yet again we have a story that it revolves around this idea that the rich are paying to do these terrible things in order to, I don't know if it's like to get is it like stress relief, or is it like, I don't know, they're like living out their violent dreams, what have you. But I just think it's kind of another element to make you think whether or not throughout the Purge movies, if like they're speaking to a larger critique of like capitalism, or if they're just speaking to a larger critique of like democracy, or like democracy run amok.
I've always thought it was an attempt to critique capitalism, not necessarily successful in almost every way, but it is smart to connect it to other films that have been made recently that lay out explicitly that we have created a system by which the richest people among us function and operate under a completely different system of rules, whether it's for the way they make money, the way they spend their time, the way they can get away with, the way they operate through the justice system, the way that they get a special Uber VIP space in LAX. And everybody wants to kind of understand that because it's so foreign. And this just happens to use explicit, gory violence, because don't we all, I mean, I certainly think that somebody that rich would probably kill me for sport if they could. Like, it just doesn't seem that far-fetched, but, you know?
Definitely.
Yeah. Oh, it's like that Parks and Rec bit with Jason Mantzoukas where Aziz Ansari says, like, I think that dude wants to hunt me.
I mean, I love these movies, and I'm so ashamed that I can't stop loving them. I'm excited for whatever comes next, but I will save more of my commentary for whatever poor has to go see The Purge 5 with me.
I just looked it up. The Forever Purge is apparently what it's called.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, I'm so excited for that.
Oh god.
Is that also coming out on like July 4th, or what are we moving it to
Probably.
now?
I think it was supposed to come out this year, and then, the world happened.
They they love putting them out during election years.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a purge during pandemic would be something that this series is probably inevitably going to do. So we just should brace for that now.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking when somebody mentioned everybody wearing masks, I was like, the Purge COVID would be terrible. Oh gosh. It's too real.
Yeah,
And they're going to do it. I know they're going to do it.
Purge-demic. No.
Purge-demic. It's coming.
We should save all of these ideas, by the way. We said them first.
We should destroy all of these ideas. You should just, I don't know, destroy this cursed podcast episode.
And now for the portion of the show where we get to share all of the other pieces of media that we've been enjoying during the pandemic. This is Locked In. So, Asia, Meredith, what else have you been enjoying with your time at home?
I've been enjoying a lot of Chinese drama throughout the year because I got really into this drama called The Untamed, which I actually wrote about for Vox, and which is you've probably seen on your social media timelines here and there because it's been wildly popular. And I started watching that in January and have just sort of fallen down the rabbit hole of watching all kinds of entertainment related to the actors and also watching more Chinese drama and more adaptations by the author who wrote the book that The Untamed is based on. So there's a lot of different threads that I've been following. One of them that I'm watching right now that I'm really enjoying is this drama called Winter Begonia, which is set in the 30s in the Peking Opera House. So one of its main characters is the star of the Peking Opera, and he befriends this man who basically is the son of a really wealthy family that gets drawn into like interpersonal and political conflict, and it sort of follows them and their friendship over the years, and it's really fascinating and really engrossing, and I really am enjoying it. And the other thing that I've been really enjoying lately is this animated series. It's, well, in China, they would call it Donghua, of this book called The Scum Villain Self-Saving System, which is this really funny series where the main character gets sort of transported into a terrible harem novel and he's basically been a fan of this harem novel. He's been reading it online and he knows all of the plot from start to finish because he's like a super fan, and he gets transported into the novel after he dies in real life. So he finds himself basically occupying the role of the worst villain in the show, or in the novel, and he knows that he has to change the plot because his character winds up getting like all of his arms and limbs chopped off. So he has to find a way to befriend the hero, who ultimately will amputate all of his limbs if he doesn't figure out how to change the plot of the story, right? So he does that by trying to subtly shift the narrative, but he can't shift it too far because he's basically kind of stuck within the constraints of the harem novel as if he were a non-playable character in a game. So he can only, like, he can't be out of character or he'll get points deducted. And if he gets too many points, he dies. But if he doesn't change the story, then he dies anyway. So it's sort of really intricate and satirical and funny. And so I've just been watching this and seeing where it's going to go. And it's been kind of a delight. So I guess those are my two kind of obscure recs for you guys: Winter Begonia and the Scum Villain self-saving system. So,
ooh, my thoughts are a little bit they're less obscure, I guess, but I just finished a couple of books. One is currently an audiobook, and it's coming out in like physical paper edition on December 1st. It's called A Certain Hunger by Chelsea G. Summers. And it is a memoir by a woman in her early 50s who was a food critic, a magazine writer during the boon years of the media industry, who's also a sociopath that murders and eats her lovers.
Yes, there it is.
And
The Purge.
It is delightful.
Isn't every food critic a sociopath who murders and eats their lovers? Like,
I certainly hope so, but it is just so much fun. I had a great time. I actually listened to it while driving from New York to Wisconsin, and so that was a wonderful way to spend the time. And I just think the heroine, the main character, is unique and different. And, you know, we rarely get to stand up for the sisterhood when it comes to being a complete and total psychopath. So that one really does it for me.
Excellent.
And also a book called I Remember You by Yrsa Sigurðardóttir, an Icelandic writer. And it's a ghost story.
Cool.
That absolutely creeped the hell out of me, but I was unable to put down and read in about 12 hours. So
what's it called?
I Remember You. It's from 2010, I think. And other than that, I've been really enjoying watching basically everything on the channel Shudder, the horror app, because they have great selections. So I've just been telling everyone that if they need something creepy to watch, they should try on the free subscription and then just get hooked, because I need people to talk about these things with.
For me, in true Halloween fashion, I have committed to watching Hocus Pocus at least 3 or 4 more times in the month of October.
Of course.
I do have the movie on DVD. Unfortunately, we will not be covering it on Pop and Lock, but maybe some point in the future.
We not for lack of trying.
We tried. We really did. And then I have finally gotten the new Hunger Games book, which is I guess it's the prequel to the original books. I was on hold for the library for like 15 weeks because the book is new. So I've only just started that. And I have also joined the Schitt's Creek bandwagon. I am already through the first season and I started this week. So I would say that's a win for me. And it's one of those shows similar to like New Girl that you can have it on the background. If you miss a few parts, it's okay. It's funny. There are lots of good one-liners. And it also recently won a ton of awards. So I'm hopeful that the next few seasons will get even better, as I've been told. Other than that, not a whole lot in the book space besides Hunger Games. Oh, I did finish Stephen King's, I guess, his most recent novel, which is The Institute, which is excellent. And I would not be surprised if it gets turned into a TV show and or movie, just like his book, The Outsiders, did.
A Stephen King thing probably won't happen. Doesn't happen a lot.
Right. Because his stuff is just like totally not famous at all. Right.
I also have been watching lots of Shudder. So Meredith, if you need a Shudder pal, I will be your Shudder pal.
Oh,
Shudder buddy.
Yay.
I would love nothing more, Asia. That sounds fantastic.
In the book realm, I just reread a book I read actually a few years ago. It's been out for several years now, but it is called Intimations by Alexandra Kleeman. It's a book of short stories. There's a lot of, very different styles, and the writing is just very beautiful and very personal. But if you want to get a taste of it, there's one story in there that is what actually made me want to read the book that I read before, that you can read online on the online magazine Guernica magazine. It is called You Disappearing. you, comma, disappearing. It's basically about an apocalypse-style event where instead of a fireball coming down and destroying the planet or a massive flood or anything, things randomly just blink out of existence one at a time. And it'll be like one day there aren't any shoes and everybody's shoes disappear, or magazines disappear one day and there's no, in a sort of magical realism way, there's no description of why it happens. They don't understand how or can't predict it at all, but things just start blinking out of existence. And it not only affects people and objects, but also thoughts and memories and feelings. And it is all told from the perspective of a woman who her relationship with someone is basically it has fallen apart somehow. And it's just this like beautiful, subtle story about an apocalypse that no one else has written about in a similar way, that I think really gives a good example of what the book is about, and I think is great and easy to read. So that's You Disappearing by Alexandra Kleeman.
Cool.
I have also talked about on this show a lot before. I'm a big fan of people streaming tabletop role-playing games online. I've talked about the big names, Critical Role, Dimension 20, etc. But there are two that have recently just started that I would really, really like for a lot of people to get behind, which are NDND, which stands for Native Dungeons and Dragons. It is an all-native indigenous peoples cast in an entirely new world. And it's really, really interesting, and I think they bring an interesting perspective to a very, very generally white male field and sort of colonial even game with Dungeons and Dragons. It's sort of rooted in that. So ND&D, I'm hoping really gets a large following as it gets started, as well as Into the Motherlands, which is an all person of color cast, which isn't actually Dungeons and Dragons. It's a different system of gameplay, but it's about a civilization that was founded when the people following Mansa Musa ventured and found a new dimension. Mansa Musa, for those who don't know, is apparently historically one of the richest people that has ever lived, if not the richest. And it's sort of about this sci-fi adventure that these characters go on in this entirely different world where the trappings of colonialism and imperialism apparently do not exist. And they get to explore this world in a way that they really get to control and sort of set their own path for. So I think it could be really, really cool. And I like all of the people that are playing on it. So check out Into the Motherlands on twitch.tv. I've also watched the Halloween Town quadrilogy
yes.
in honor of spooky season.
Nice.
And I am hard into the game Genshin Impact, which is like Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, but it's anime and it's a gacha game. So you're collecting all of these characters and casting spells and fighting animals and stuff. And it's free to play. It's just a lot of fun, and it's fun to, like with Fortnite or anything, there's microtransactions, but you get free ones and get bulls and can earn weapons and characters and stuff. If that's the kind of thing you're into, I think you'd like Genshin Impact. Thanks for listening. If you think you have a way to solve or at least survive the Purge more effectively than tax fraud, make sure to tweet at us on Twitter. You can find us at the handle @PopandLockPod. That's Pop, the letter N, Lock with an E like the philosopher, pod. Make sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. We look forward to unraveling your favorite show or movie next time. Pop and Lock is produced by me, Landry Ayres, as a project of libertarianism.org. To learn more, visit us on the web at www.libertarianism.org.